Imagine, if you will, a silence so profound it has a weight. Not the peaceful quiet of a library, but the crushing, metallic silence of a giant that has fallen dead. This was the silence that had smothered the Blackwood Quarry for 3 agonizing weeks. A silence that meant no paychecks, no rumbling trucks, no future. At the heart of this stillness lay the cause. A custom-built haul truck named the Behemoth, a $2 million titan of engineering, now as lifeless as a fossil. Its engine, a labyrinth of steel and wire, was a tomb. And around this tomb, a woman stood alone, her slight frame a stark contrast to the monstrous machine. Her name was Alara Vance. On a small television screen flickering in the quarry's dusty break room, another man was speaking. His name was Rex Thorne, a man whose tailored suit was as sharp as his tongue, and whose reputation was built on polished concrete and digital diagnostics. He was the owner of Thorne Diesel, the biggest, most modern repair empire in 3 counties. He looked directly into the camera, his face a mask of condescending certainty. 20 of my best men, he declared, his voice dripping with arrogance. Certified, factory-trained experts have been over that machine. We've spent a fortune. If we can't fix it, it can't be fixed. Then the reporter mentioned another name, a whisper of a last resort. Rex Thorne laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. It was a sound like grinding gears. Alara Vance, Liam's widow. With all due respect to the dead, she runs a hobby shop out of a barn. No woman can fix what 20 men couldn't. This isn't about tinkering with a lawnmower. This is real engineering. That soundbite, dripping with dismissive pride, echoed across the silent quarry, a place holding its breath. The stakes were impossibly high. For the town, it was economic survival. For Rex Thorne, it was the infallibility of his brand. But for Alara Vance, standing there in her grease-stained overalls, clutching a worn leather-bound notebook that felt heavier than any wrench, it was everything else. It was about honor, about legacy, and about proving that the heart of a machine, like the heart of a person, cannot always be read by a scanner. It must be listened to. Let me take you back to how this all began, to the moment the giant first fell. The Behemoth was the lifeblood of the Blackwood Quarry. It was a singular creation, a prototype with a complex hybrid engine that no other vehicle in the region possessed. It could haul 300 tons of granite up a 12-degree grade without breaking a sweat. Its roar was the town's morning coffee, the sound of prosperity. Then, one Tuesday, it simply stopped. There was no catastrophic bang, no plume of black smoke, just a cough, a shudder, and then nothing. The silence that followed was terrifying. The quarry's owner, a vast, faceless corporation based hundreds of miles away, did the logical thing. They called the most expensive and reputable expert in the state, Rex Thorne. Rex arrived not in a work truck, but in a gleaming black sedan that seemed to repel the quarry's dust by its sheer force of will. He was a man who believed in systems, in certifications, in the clean, predictable world of computer diagnostics. His 20 mechanics swarmed the Behemoth like ants on a carcass, their laptops and digital readers flashing. They were the best money could buy, each with a wall of framed certificates to prove it. They worked for 3 solid weeks. They replaced the fuel injectors. They recalibrated the electronic control module. They swapped out the turbochargers. They ran diagnostics until the code itself seemed to beg for mercy. With every failed attempt, Rex Thorne's expenses mounted. But more importantly, his frustration curdled into a cold, hard anger. The quarry bled money, furloughing workers by the dozen. The town of Blackwood began to wither, the local diner growing quieter, the general store's shelves staying fuller for longer. The silence of the Behemoth had become the silence of a community holding its breath before a final, devastating blow. Rex Thorne was not merely a businessman, he was a man forged in the crucible of a terrible, private failure. Years ago, his own son, a vibrant teenager with a love for old cars, had been killed in an accident. A faulty brake line on a classic muscle car, Rex himself had helped restore. He had checked it, but he had missed something, some subtle flaw, some whisper of metal fatigue that no manual had ever taught him to listen for. In the wake of that unspeakable grief, Rex had rebuilt himself. He had banished the old ways, the intuitive feel for machinery. He put his faith entirely in what could be measured, certified, and guaranteed. His empire was a fortress built to keep the ghosts of uncertainty at bay. This behemoth, this illogical, stubborn beast of a machine, was threatening to tear that fortress down brick by brick. Now, let me tell you about Alara Vance. She was not a magnate. She was a widow. Her world had shrunk to the size of a small two-bay garage behind her modest house, a place that still smelled faintly of her late husband, Liam. Liam had been the opposite of Rex Thorne. He was a mechanical whisperer, a man who believed engines had souls and spoke a language of their own. He never cared for certifications. He cared for understanding. His greatest treasure wasn't a diagnostic computer, but a collection of leather-bound notebooks filled with his elegant, looping script, detailing every strange problem he had ever solved, every mechanical secret he had ever uncovered. When Liam died suddenly from a heart attack 2 years prior, he left Alara with a mountain of grief and a garage full of tools. She had been his apprentice since she was a teenager, not just a wife. She had absorbed his philosophy, his gentle touch, his preternatural ability to listen to the rhythm of an engine and hear the one beat that was out of place. But, in the eyes of the world, especially a world dominated by men like Rex Thorne, she was just the grieving widow, a woman playing with her husband's old toys. Her business, Vance and Son Legacy Repair, a name Liam had chosen long before they knew they would never have children, barely scraped by, fixing tractors and old farm trucks for neighbors who still believed in the old ways. She was financially vulnerable, a breath away from having to sell the garage, the last piece of Liam she had left. The call came on a Thursday afternoon. It was Silas, the quarry foreman, a man with a face like a roadmap of every long shift he'd ever worked. He had been one of Liam's oldest friends. His voice was gravelly with desperation. "Alara," he said, the word heavy with apology. "I know it's a lot to ask. Thorne and his army can't make heads or tails of it. They're talking about scrapping the whole machine. The company will shut this place down for good. We're out of options." He paused. Liam. He would have known what to do. That was the key, wasn't it? Liam would have known, and Liam had taught her. The thought was a terrifying lightning strike of responsibility and opportunity. She thought of the condescending news report she had seen the night before. She thought of Rex Thorne's smug, dismissive laugh. A quiet, cold anger, an emotion she hadn't truly felt since Liam's passing, began to smolder within her. It wasn't about the money. It was about the name on her garage. It was about the notebook sitting on her workbench. "I'll be there in an hour," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the tempest raging inside her. She hung up the phone and walked to the workbench. She picked up Liam's final notebook, its leather cover worn smooth by his hands. On the first page, in his familiar script, was a quote he had lived by. "Listen longer than you look." She tucked the notebook into the large pocket of her overalls, grabbed the old steel toolbox that had been her grandfather's before it was Liam's, and walked out of the garage, leaving the ghosts of her grief behind to face the giant. Her arrival at the quarry was a study in contrasts. She pulled up in her beat-up 20-year-old pickup truck, its engine purring with a smooth, quiet rhythm that was a testament to her care. She parked it next to Rex Thorne's gleaming, soulless sedan. He was standing there, arms crossed, flanked by the local news crew he had clearly summoned to witness what he believed would be her ultimate humiliation. The furloughed workers, dozens of them, had gathered at a distance, their faces a mixture of desperate hope and ingrained skepticism. They saw a woman, small and unassuming, stepping out of an old truck, and their hope flickered. Rex Thorne approached her, his steps deliberate and loud on the gravel. He was taller than she was, and he used every inch of it to look down on her. The television camera zoomed in, a vulture circling a foregone conclusion. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice a silky, patronizing drawl. "I admire your courage, but as I said on the news, this is a multi-million-dollar piece of proprietary technology. It's not a rusty tractor." The crowd of workers shuffled their feet. Some of them snickered. They were good men, but they were scared men, and scared men often cling to the familiar. A woman fixing the behemoth was not familiar. It was a fantasy. Alara met Rex's gaze. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a piston out of time, but her face was a calm mask. She held his stare and said nothing, letting his arrogance hang in the air and poison itself. "My team," he continued, gesturing to the group of defeated-looking men in matching Thorne diesel uniforms, "has run every diagnostic known to man. We have schematics from the manufacturer in Germany. We have consulted their top engineers. The consensus is a catastrophic engine control failure. The unit is fried. It's a $500,000 part that will take 6 months to fabricate. He was not just giving a diagnosis, he was delivering a eulogy. Ilara finally spoke. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the dusty air with the precision of a laser. "You ran diagnostics on the electronics," she stated. It was not a question. "Did any of you listen to it?" Rex actually scoffed, a sharp, ugly burst of air. "Listen to it? It's a dead engine. It doesn't make a sound. What, are you going to use a stethoscope? Maybe some healing crystals?" The mockery was thick, and a few of the younger workers laughed along with him. The cameraman grinned, sensing he was capturing gold. This was the moment, my friends, where the story could have ended, where a lesser person would have turned around, gotten back in their old truck, and driven away from the laughter and the scorn. But Ilara Vance was not a lesser person. She was Liam Vance's legacy. She turned her gaze from Rex to the silent, hulking mass of the behemoth. Then she looked at the faces of the watching workers, at the worry etched into the lines around their eyes. She saw more than just a broken machine. She saw broken livelihoods, a broken town. And in that moment, the quiet anger inside her crystallized into something hard and unyielding. She turned back to Rex Thorne, her eyes now burning with a cold fire. "Let's make this interesting," she said, her voice still quiet but now laced with steel. The laughter died in the air. Even Rex was taken aback by her sudden shift. "You're so certain I'll fail. You've brought a news crew to watch me do it, so let's raise the stakes beyond your pride." Rex's eyes narrowed. He saw a trap, but his own colossal ego would not let him back down, especially not on camera. "I'm listening," he said, his tone daring her. "If I can't get this engine running," Ilara said, her voice ringing with clarity, "I will close my garage. I'll hand you the keys, and I'll never pick up a wrench in this county again. I will publicly admit that you were right, and a woman's place is not in a professional garage." The gasp from the crowd was audible. Silas, the foreman, took a step forward, his face pale with alarm. "Ilara, no," he whispered. She held up a hand to silence him, her eyes locked on Rex. "But if I succeed," she continued, "if I get this behemoth running, right here, right now, you will pay me what you have already charged the quarry for your 3 weeks of failure, every last dollar, and you will do it publicly." She paused, letting the weight of her terms settle. "And you will add another $100,000 from your own pocket for my time." The air crackled. This was no longer about a repair. It was a duel. Rex Thorne looked at her, at the quiet woman in the worn overalls, and he saw an easy victory. He saw a chance to not only be proven right, but to utterly crush the last vestige of the old world, intuitive mechanics he so despised. He saw his own public vindication. A slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "You have a deal, Mrs. Vance," he boomed, extending a hand. The camera zoomed in as she took it. Her hand was small, calloused, and covered in a fine layer of old grease. His was large, soft, and immaculate. The handshake was a collision of two worlds. "Let the show begin," Rex declared to the camera. "Let's all watch the master at work." He turned and walked away, his posture radiating a smug triumph that was almost painful to behold. He had no doubt he had just won. He had no idea he had just sealed his own fate. Ilara let out a slow breath, the fury and adrenaline of the confrontation receding, leaving only the monumental task ahead. She was alone now, the world shrinking to just her, the silent giant, and the weight of the promises she had just made. She walked toward the behemoth, the distant murmuring of the crowd and the hum of the television camera fading into white noise. She was not walking toward a machine. She was walking toward a puzzle, a mystery, a patient on an operating table. She did not open a laptop. She did not consult a digital schematic. Instead, she placed a hand flat against the cold, colossal engine block. She closed her eyes. This was Liam's first lesson. Connect. Feel the stillness. Understand the absence of life before you try to restore it. The metal was cold, unnaturally so. It was a dead cold, a cold that spoke of inertia, of a fundamental unwillingness to move. The 20 experts had seen a collection of parts. Ilara was feeling for a soul. The mocking chorus of workers was still whispering. "What's she doing? Praying to it?" one of them muttered, loud enough to be heard. Maybe she's trying to warm it up with her hands, another joked. Ilara ignored them. Her focus was absolute. She was in a dialogue with the machine, a silent conversation that no one else could hear. She ran her hands along fuel lines, hydraulic hoses, and wiring harnesses, her fingertips reading the subtle textures, the minute variations in tension and temperature. She was mapping the machine not with her eyes, but with her hands. After several minutes of this silent communion, she opened her eyes. She pulled Liam's notebook from her pocket. Its pages were filled with his drawings, his notes, his theories. It was not a repair manual. It was a book of mechanical philosophy. She flipped to a section titled Giants and Their Whispers, a chapter on large-scale industrial engines. Her finger traced a line of his script. A sudden death with no sound is not a death at all. It is a choke. The giant has not broken. It has been gagged. Look not for the broken bone, but for the blockage in the throat. A choke. Not a catastrophic failure. Rex's team, with their focus on the million-dollar electronic brain, had been looking for a stroke. Liam was telling her to look for something far simpler, far more insidious. She walked to the massive air intake system, a series of filters and pipes the size of a man's torso. The experts had glanced at it, seen that the primary filters were clean, and moved on. They had followed their checklist. But Ilara wasn't following a checklist. She was following an idea. She pulled a small, powerful flashlight from her toolbox and unlatched the main housing, peering deep into the gullet of the machine. And there it was. It was not a major part. It was not something that would ever show up on a diagnostic scan. Deep inside the secondary manifold, almost completely hidden behind a bend in the pipe, was a simple shop rag. A red cloth, identical to the ones used by Thorne's own crew, had been sucked into the system and was wedged tight against a secondary airflow sensor. It was starving the engine of the precise volume of air it needed to operate, but it was just porous enough to not trigger a complete blockage code. The engine's sophisticated computer, sensing an anomalous but not critical airflow issue, had simply shut everything down as a precaution. It was a safety protocol, not a failure. The machine wasn't dead. It was in a self-induced coma. It was a problem that would take 20 men with 1,000 pages of schematics a year to find, because they were not looking for a lost rag. They were looking for a broken miracle. Ilara looked over at Rex's crew, standing smugly by their service truck. One of them, a young apprentice, avoided her gaze, looking down at his boots. She wondered if it was an accident, a moment of carelessness, or something more. But it didn't matter. The why was irrelevant. The what was everything. "I need a flexible grabber tool," she called out to Silas, who was watching her with an expression of pure, unadulterated hope. About 4 feet long. Silas scrambled to the quarry's workshop and returned in a flash, pressing the tool into her hand. The crowd murmured, leaning in. They could see she had found something. Rex Thorne himself took a few steps closer, his condescending smile tightening at the edges. He couldn't see what she was doing, but he could feel the atmosphere shifting. The air of mockery was evaporating, replaced by a tense curiosity. With the delicate precision of a surgeon, Ilara guided the grabber tool deep into the intake manifold. The camera crew rushed forward, the lens pushing in over her shoulder. For a moment she fumbled, the rag slipping from the tool's metal claws. A collective sigh of disappointment rippled through the workers. Rex Thorne's smile returned, wider this time. "Having some trouble, Mrs. Vance?" he called out, his voice dripping with false concern. She ignored him. She closed her eyes for a second, took a deep breath, and visualized the path. She remembered Liam teaching her how to retrieve a dropped bolt from inside a complex transmission case, telling her, "Don't look with your eyes, feel with the tool, make it an extension of your fingers." She tried again. This time, the claws clamped down firmly. Slowly, carefully, she began to retract the tool. The red rag emerged from the darkness of the engine's throat, like a magician pulling a scarf from a hat. She held it up. A stunned silence fell over the quarry. It was a silence even more profound than the one the broken engine had created. It was the silence of 200 tons of collective assumption being shattered in an instant. She dropped the dirty rag on the ground at her feet. It lay there, a small, insignificant piece of cloth that had brought an entire town to its knees. She looked at Rex Thorne. The smile was gone from his face, replaced by a mask of disbelief. His perfect digital world had just been brought down by a misplaced rag. "Is that it?" someone in the crowd whispered. Was that the whole problem? But Ilara wasn't celebrating. A true mechanic knows that the first problem is rarely the only problem. As the initial wave of relief washed over the onlookers, a new tension began to build within her. The engine had been choked for 3 weeks. What damage had the subsequent failed attempts to fix it caused? Rex's men hadn't just run diagnostics. They had replaced parts, rerouted power, and tried to force start the system multiple times. That was the choke, she said, her voice calm and measured. Now, I have to see what damage the doctors did trying to revive the patient. The jab was subtle, but it landed on Rex Thorne like a physical blow. His face, which had been pale with shock, now flushed with anger and humiliation. He had been publicly exposed. His team of experts, his entire philosophy, had been undone by a rag. But this was not the end. You see, my friends, this is where the story takes a turn. This is the point where simple vindication becomes a true test of character. Ilara moved from the air intake to the engine's primary ignition system. Don't start it yet, she commanded, as Silas moved instinctively toward the cab. They tried to bypass the shutdown protocol. They probably surged the ignition coils. She pulled a voltmeter from her bag, her movements economical and swift. The crowd watched, now completely silent. Their skepticism transformed into rapt attention. They were no longer watching a woman, they were watching a master. She tested the first coil. It was fine. The second, also fine. She moved along the massive bank of cylinders, her process methodical. Then she reached the 7th coil. The meter gave a reading that was wildly out of spec. It was fried, completely burnt out. A surge, just as she had suspected. One of Rex's men, trying to force a start, had sent a jolt of raw power through the system, blowing the coil. This was the second problem, a setback born from incompetence. Rex saw her pause. He saw the reading on her meter. A flicker of dark hope ignited in his eyes. A blown coil, he said, his voice regaining a sliver of its former arrogance. Just as we suspected, one of many electronic failures. You see, it's not so simple. That part has to be ordered from the factory. It'll take weeks. He was trying to reclaim the narrative, to frame her discovery as a minor footnote in the larger, more complex failure his team had already identified. Ilara didn't even look at him. You don't need to order it, she said quietly, almost to herself. She began to look around the engine bay, her eyes scanning not for a replacement part, but for a solution. Her gaze fell upon a secondary, non-essential hydraulic pump that serviced a redundant safety feature. It was a small auxiliary system that Liam had once called a belt and suspenders design, an engineer's overcautious afterthought. She consulted his notebook again, her finger flying across a page of intricate wiring diagrams he had sketched from memory after visiting the factory where the behemoth was built. His notes were clear. The auxiliary pump used an identical ignition coil, just a slightly older model. In an emergency, it could be bypassed and its coil repurposed for the main engine. It was a field-expedient fix, a trick known only to someone who understood the machine's design philosophy, not just its parts list. It was a secret hidden in plain sight. I need a socket wrench and a T40 Torx bit, she said to Silas. He was already there, holding out the exact tools she needed, his movements now those of a loyal acolyte. She quickly and expertly disconnected the redundant pump, removed its coil, and carried it over to the main engine block. It was a perfect fit. The crowd watched, mesmerized. She was not just replacing a part, she was performing a transplant, taking a piece from a non-essential limb to save the heart. Rex Thorne stood frozen, his jaw slack. He was watching a level of mechanical artistry he did not believe was possible. It was intuitive, resourceful, and utterly brilliant. It was everything his rigid by-the-book methodology was not. He was watching the ghost of the mechanic he used to be, the one he had buried along with his son. The sight of it was breaking him. His carefully constructed world of certifications and certainties was crumbling around him, and in its place was a terrifying, forgotten landscape of instinct and feel. With the new coil in place, Ilara made one final check. She walked the length of the engine, her hand resting lightly on the valve covers as if to reassure the beast. She looked at the fuel lines, the electrical connections, the hydraulic pressures. Everything was as it should be. The choke was cleared. The damage from the subsequent malpractice had been repaired with an ingenious bit of improvisation. There was nothing left to do. She looked up at Silas, who was waiting in the cab, his hand hovering over the ignition key. She gave him a single, sharp nod. The moment had arrived. This, my friends, is the moment that breaks your heart or makes it soar. It is the instant where all the doubt, all the mockery, all the struggle is either validated or turned to ash. The entire quarry, 100 men, a news crew, and one shattered ego, held its breath. The silence was absolute, a perfect vacuum of anticipation. Silas turned the key. For a heartbeat, there was nothing but the click of the solenoid. A low groan of despair started to rise from the crowd. Rex Thorne's face began to twist into a mask of grim, relieved triumph. He had been right all along. She had failed. But then, a sound. A deep guttural cough. A shudder ran through the behemoth's massive frame. Then another cough, louder this time, followed by a low, rumbling growl. It was the sound of a giant stirring from a long, deep sleep. And then it happened. With a deafening, world-shaking roar, the behemoth's engine exploded into life. The sound was a physical force, a wave of pure power that washed over the quarry, blowing away the dust and the doubt, and the 3 weeks of crushing silence. It was not a sick engine's sputter. It was the full-throated, perfectly tuned roar of a healthy, living titan. The ground vibrated, the air thrummed. It was the most beautiful sound the people of Blackwood had ever heard. For a long moment, the crowd was paralyzed, stunned into immobility by the sheer, unadulterated shock of it. They had come to watch a failure, to confirm their own cynical expectations. Instead, they had witnessed a miracle. Then, one man, a grizzled old miner near the front, slowly took off his hard hat and held it over his heart. Then another, and another. A single person started to clap, a slow, rhythmic applause. It was joined by another, and then another, until the entire quarry erupted in a thunderous, overwhelming ovation. Cheers and whistles and shouts of joy replaced the engine's roar. Men were hugging each other, tears streaming down their dust-caked faces. The sound of hope had returned. The failed experts from Thorne Diesel stood in a stunned huddle, their faces a mixture of shock and, to their credit, a dawning, grudging respect. They were looking at Alara not as a competitor, but as a teacher who had just delivered a lesson they would never forget. They were witnessing the difference between knowing the book and reading the story. The cameraman, forgetting his professional detachment, was simply pointing his lens at Alara, his own eyes wide with awe. He knew in that instant that he was capturing more than a local news story. He was capturing a legend being born. And Rex Thorne? He did not move. He stood rooted to the spot, the cheers and applause washing over him like a storm he could not weather. The roar of the engine was the sound of his entire worldview being torn to shreds. He looked at the machine, then at the cheering crowd, and then at Alara Vance. She was not looking at him. She was not gloating. She was simply standing there, wiping her greasy hands on a clean rag from her own pocket. Her face calm, her expression one of quiet, focused satisfaction. She had done the work. That was all that mattered. The sight of her quiet dignity in the face of her overwhelming victory was the final blow. It broke through the fortress of arrogance he had spent years building. It shattered the shield of certifications and procedures. And in the rubble, it exposed the raw, gaping wound of his past. He saw not Alara Vance, but the ghost of his younger self, the boy who could feel an engine's soul, the man who had lost his son because he had stopped listening. The dam of his carefully controlled emotions burst. His face crumpled. A single ragged sob escaped his lips. He turned, stumbling away from the celebration, away from the camera, away from the woman who had so completely and utterly dismantled him, and he fled. He did not storm off in anger. He fled in shame. But the story, my dear friends, does not end there. Vengeance is a fire that burns out, but redemption is a seed that grows. As Rex Thorne stumbled away, blinded by tears, he ran almost directly into a small, elderly woman with sharp, intelligent eyes. She had been standing near the edge of the crowd, watching the entire spectacle with a quiet, discerning gaze. She put a firm, steadying hand on his arm. "Mr. Thorne," she said, her voice surprisingly strong, "I think you and I need to have a word." Meanwhile, the celebration at the quarry was reaching a fever pitch. Silas had climbed down from the behemoth's cab and enveloped Alara in a bone-crushing hug, lifting her off her feet. "You did it, Alara! By God, you did it!" he roared, his voice thick with emotion. The workers surged forward, no longer a mocking chorus, but a crowd of grateful disciples. They patted her on the back, they shook her hand, they thanked her with a sincerity that brought a lump to her throat. She had not just fixed a truck, she had saved their jobs, their families, their town. As the crowd began to part, the elderly woman approached, with a now composed, utterly broken Rex Thorne in tow. "An incredible display, Mrs. Vance," the woman said, her eyes twinkling with an unnerving level of authority. "Truly incredible." Before Alara could respond, the woman turned to the news reporter, who was trying to get a statement. "I believe it's time I introduce myself. My name is Agnes Sterling. I am the CEO of Sterling Mining Consolidated, the company that owns this quarry." A new wave of stunned silence rolled over the assembly. This unassuming woman in a simple coat was the faceless corporation. She was the one who signed the checks, the one with the power to shut them all down. She had been there the whole time, in disguise, watching, testing. "I came here to personally oversee the decision to decommission this site," Agnes Sterling continued, her voice projecting easily over the now idling engine. "I was told this machine, our single biggest investment here, was irreparable. I was told the problem was a catastrophic computer failure. It seems I was misinformed." Her gaze fell upon Rex Thorne. It was not a harsh gaze, but it was heavy with the weight of consequence. "Mr. Thorne's company has billed us for 3 weeks of labor and nearly $200,000 in parts he claimed were necessary, all to find a problem that was, at its core, a rag left behind by one of his own employees." She paused, letting the indictment hang in the air. "And then he made a public wager to humiliate the one person who could actually solve the problem." Rex Thorne did not flinch. He did not make excuses. He simply stood there and took it, his face a portrait of raw, unvarnished shame. He then did something no one ever expected. He walked forward, past Agnes Sterling, and stopped directly in front of Alara. The camera, which had been off, flickered back to life. The reporter, sensing the real story, was only just beginning. Rex looked at Alara, and for the first time, he was not looking down on her. He was looking up. "Mrs. Vance," he began, his voice cracking, raw with an emotion he had suppressed for years. I was wrong." He took a shuddering breath, the public apology costing him more than any amount of money ever could. "I was arrogant, I was ignorant, and I was cruel. What you did here today, it was not just a repair, it was art. It was a kind of magic I had forgotten existed." Tears began to stream down his face, cutting clean paths through the grime of his shame. "Years ago," he confessed, his voice dropping to a near whisper, the words tearing out of him, "I lost my son. There was a mechanical failure on a car I had worked on. I missed something, a small thing, a whisper. I blamed myself, and I swore I would never trust that feeling again. I built my entire company on computers and diagnostics because I was afraid of missing the whisper again. Today, you listened to the whisper. You heard what I have been deaf to for 15 years. You did not just fix this engine, Mrs. Vance. You showed me what I broke inside myself." He reached into his jacket and pulled out his checkbook. Without hesitation, he wrote a check and handed it to her. It was for the full amount of his company's invoice, plus the $100,000 from the wager. But he wasn't finished. "This isn't enough," he said, his voice gaining a strange new strength, the strength of a man who has finally hit rock bottom and found solid ground. "What you have, that knowledge, that legacy from your husband, it is priceless. It is more valuable than my entire company. I was wrong to mock it. I was a fool." Agnes Sterling stepped forward, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Indeed, it is priceless, Mr. Thorne, which is why a simple payment will not suffice." She turned to Alara. "Mrs. Vance, your contract with Mr. Thorne is null and void because you will now be working for me. I am canceling our service contract with Thorne Diesel, effective immediately." A gasp went through the crowd. Rex Thorne's empire was about to crumble. But then Agnes Sterling did something even more unexpected. "Instead," she continued, I am offering a new contract, a $2 million annual contract for the maintenance of all heavy machinery at this quarry, and I am offering it not to one of you, but to both of you." She looked back and forth between a stunned Alara and a bewildered Rex. "I am proposing a new venture, a partnership. The Vance Thorn Applied Mechanics Division. Mrs. Vance, you will be the director of operations. You will lead it. You will teach it. Your husband's legacy, your intuition, your magic, will be the guiding philosophy." She then turned to Rex. "And you, Mr. Thorn, will be the director of modern systems. Your knowledge of diagnostics and new technology is valuable, but from now on, your computers will serve the mechanic, not the other way around. You will learn to listen again. Your company will provide the infrastructure, but Mrs. Vance will provide the soul." She smiled, a genuine, brilliant smile. "I believe the two of you together could create something truly revolutionary, a place where the old wisdom and the new technology work hand in hand. What do you say?" Alara was speechless. Her mind was reeling. A partnership with the man who had publicly humiliated her? She looked at Rex Thorn. He was no longer the arrogant magnate. He was a broken man, stripped bare of his pride. But in his eyes, she saw something new, a flicker of humility, a desperate desire for redemption. She thought of Liam. He was never a man who held a grudge. He was a man who believed in fixing things. Not just engines, but people too. Rex looked at her, his eyes pleading. "Mrs. Vance?" "Alara," he said softly. "I know I don't deserve it, but she's right. I need this. I need to learn what I've lost. I will work for you. I will be your student. Please." In that moment, Alara made a choice. It was not a choice born of anger or a desire for revenge. It was a choice born of strength, compassion, and the core of who she was. She looked at Agnes Sterling, then back at Rex, and she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "I accept," she said. "Let us jump forward now, not by days or weeks, but by 2 full years. Let me show you what grew from the seeds planted on that dusty day in the Blackwood Quarry. The quarry itself is no longer just a quarry. It is thriving, more productive than ever. But it is also home to the Vance Thorn Center for Holistic Mechanics, a state-of-the-art training facility. The old, disused workshop has been transformed into a bright, modern classroom and garage, where the roar of engines is mixed with the sound of eager voices. Alara Vance is no longer a struggling widow. She is a respected leader, a mentor, a titan of her industry. She stands at the front of the workshop, not in greasy overalls, but in a clean, professional work jacket, with the VT logo embroidered over the heart. She is teaching a new class of apprentices. Half of them are young women, inspired by the viral video of her triumph, a video that has been viewed tens of millions of times around the globe. She moves with a newfound confidence, but her core philosophy remains the same. "Listen longer than you look," she tells her students, tapping a gleaming engine block. "Every machine tells a story. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." And what of Rex Thorn? He is there too. He is older, grayer, and infinitely quieter. He is no longer the man in the sharp suit. He stands at the back of the class, observing, his face a mask of quiet contemplation. He manages the digital diagnostic wing of the center, but his real job, as he sees it, is to be Alara's first and most devoted student. He has learned to listen again. He often brings coffee to the apprentices and shares stories not of his corporate triumphs, but of his greatest failure, using his own story as a cautionary tale against the dangers of pride. He and Alara have forged a partnership built on a foundation of mutual respect that is stronger than any steel. He found his redemption not in success, but in surrender. The behemoth still roars through the quarry, a rolling monument to the day everything changed. Its engine has never run better. The town of Blackwood is booming, the new training center having brought jobs and life back into the community. Agnes Sterling became a close friend and advisor to Alara, her initial test of character having yielded a result far beyond her wildest expectations. Alara's small garage, Vance & Son Legacy Repair, is no longer a business. It has been preserved exactly as Liam left it, a private museum, a quiet sanctuary where she can go to connect with his memory. She no longer needs the income from it. She has built a new legacy, one that honors the past while building a better, more inclusive future. So you see, my friends, this was never just a story about a broken truck. It was a story about broken ideas. It was about the battle between hollow pride and quiet competence, between the arrogance of the book and the wisdom of the hand. It proves that true strength isn't about never falling. It's about how you rise. It shows that character, skill, and dignity are not defined by gender or status, or the clothes you wear, but by the integrity of your work and the grace with which you treat others. It is a story that reminds us that sometimes, to fix the most complex problems, you don't need a more advanced computer. You just need to listen.